Marriage is a cemetery of hopes, and initially, this phrase didn't have such a bad meaning. And it seems this poem was written in honor of sublime and limitless love. For the main character, marriage is not the joy of living, but a symbol of unhappiness, of an uncomfortable family life, where relations and disputes between husband and wife worsen every day. He was sure that you must pretend to be kind, no matter how they use you, but in return, you still receive disgust from your own children. And the main character definitely did not plan to live in such a hell. Therefore, he enjoyed the wonderful life of a single person, ignoring the sorrows of all his friends. And he was sure that being single was incredibly cool. But nevertheless, the day came in the protagonist's life when he had to wonder why they wanted to marry him. The carefree and happy time he spent as a bachelor was about to evaporate. After all, a girl appeared in his life who openly told him she wanted to marry a young man. But what she wanted most was to force him to kneel. And this lady was known in the empire for her cruelty. The main character was so surprised that he couldn't understand at all what this woman was wearing. The silence of the night enveloped the world, and a slight aroma of freshness floated in the air as the moonlight gently flooded the hall where the young man stood before. The main character, proposed marriage to the girl, wanting to share life's trials with her, supporting and inspiring each other. The silence enveloped them hypnotically and full of anticipation, and his heart skipped a beat, waiting for an answer, where every moment felt like an eternity. The main character suddenly opened his eyes and realized it was just another strange dream. This was not the first time he had this dream, and its meaning was completely incomprehensible to the young master. For a couple of months now, the main character has been having the same dream, and in it, he constantly makes a proposal to an unknown girl. Although it was just a dream, the young man clearly felt that he was probably dreaming about the wedding for some reason. But for now, even the thought of this dream soon coming true scared him. He slammed a glass of water onto the table and thought that this dream was definitely not meant to come true, and that married life was not at all appealing. The young man was sure this would never happen because a marriage proposal contradicted all his principles. A sudden knock sounded on the master bedroom, and a voice was heard asking if Mr. Raven had woken up. A majestic man appeared at the door. He was the head butler of the master's estate. The man asked if the gentleman had slept well last night, and the young man looked at him suspiciously. Raven asked if there was anything he needed to do to please a family member. The butler laughed and said that nothing could be hidden from the young master, and he understood everything correctly. His father wanted to see him urgently. Raven asked him to tell his father that he would visit soon, and the man was already waiting for him, standing thoughtfully near his office window. Suddenly, his son's voice was heard behind him, who immediately asked for forgiveness and asked if his father had called him. Raven entered the office and sat calmly on the sofa, and his father suggested getting straight to the point to discuss an important topic. The man handed an unknown paper to his son and told him he wanted the young master to marry Princess Charlene. The young man asked if his father really meant Princess Charlene, and it seemed the man was serious. Raven didn't immediately believe his father's words and decided that he was probably joking, because he chose this particular girl among all the beautiful contenders. Charlene was born into a ducal family of famous healers who are responsible for healing and cleansing the entire empire. On the other side was the Gyre ducal family. They fought bloodthirsty monsters and constantly got wounded and injured in fierce battles. Therefore, Raven had no doubt about the real reason why his future wife was chosen, and a new member of the Gyre ducal family. However, there was a problem, and it was Princess Charlene, the girl known throughout the empire for making men cry and suffer without remorse. Although Raven had never met the princess in person, she was too famous in high society. And they say the lady is incredibly beautiful, but her cruel nature leaves much to be desired. One day, the younger son confessed his sincere and strong feelings to the princess, and she immediately told him to disappear. She was sure that this young man could only become her puppy, but she didn't want to dirty her hands with him. Princess Charlene was a girl who openly hated all men, but for some reason, she unexpectedly agreed to marry Raven. Ironically, if this lady is called the person who makes men cry, then the main character was known for making girls cry. And this is the exact opposite of having a serious relationship. And happy, Princess Charlene was known throughout the empire, and the young man was sure that, instead of a friendly conversation at the first meeting, he would most likely be killed. or definitely attacked with a knife. Raven's father declared confidently that everything had been decided a long time ago, and that his son's opinion was not to be discussed. It was an order from His Majesty, and Raven could not break the engagement. As he had done before, the young man didn't immediately understand why the choice was so critical, and his father probably didn't know all the information. He said that, like his father, he loved open relationships with girls, and he had absolutely no intention of starting a serious relationship, much less entering into a marriage contract. And getting married, the man was sure that an addiction to open relationships was not a reason to refuse marriage, especially if the young man broke off the engagement. His father promised that he would marry his sister to the Marquis, known to be a real pervert, but this pair had too large an age gap and would look like a child and a guardian. And indeed, the father is so eager to please His Majesty. The man said his son would have to make an important decision if he didn't want to sacrifice his sister and hand her over to a man she would never love. At that moment, the butler entered the office and apologized for interrupting such an important conversation between father and son, but Princess Charlene has arrived at the estate and is now waiting to meet the master and his son Raven. In the end, it turned out that the father had already led the princess to the gazebo, located in the garden, and the son only needed to go greet the young lady, and the father probably planned to hide everything from him until the very end. Raven silently left his father's office, bitterly realizing that the man had already calculated and planned everything a long time ago. The princess was waiting for the young man in the garden, and this garden was full of life and colors. Bright flowers bloomed in abundance. The scent of jasmine and roses filled the air, creating an atmosphere of magic. Sunbeams broke through the foliage, playing with her hair and giving her image an almost fairy tale appearance. The main character already noticed a beautiful person from afar, whose meeting was not an accident or destiny, but a clearly thought-out plan. In this garden, surrounded by a magical atmosphere, she was ready to share all her dreams with him, and hopes as well as her plans for a life together. And so, Raven appeared before Princess Charlene, walking through the flowery garden alleys with a smile on his lips. And he couldn't help but notice how the sunlight played in her hair, giving her even more appeal. When the main character approached the princess, he couldn't immediately find the words to at least greet her, or be the first to start a dialogue, because the figure standing before him looked exactly like the unknown girl from the dream. It was astonishing, and the girls looked so alike that the young man involuntarily wondered if the girl from his dream had come to him. But this was completely impossible. The young knight approached the lady and introduced himself as the eldest son of the Gyre family, inviting the princess to sit down together at the table, get acquainted, and have a cup of tea. Due to her cold gaze, the princess gives the impression of an icy lady. But the young man believed she wasn't as bad as all secular society claimed. The young man would probably be able to reach an agreement with her, so he started the conversation first and addressed the stranger. The young man apologized and said he would like to hear this personally from the girl, and asked her what she thought about their engagement. The lady replied that she didn't care at all, but for some reason she couldn't look up and look the young master in the eyes. Raven was sure that the princess was openly lying to him, and a girl who hated men couldn't suddenly want to marry an unknown young master. Therefore, the young man openly asked her why she wanted to marry him, because the empire is full of other husband candidates. But the princess suddenly stood up abruptly, approached the still completely unknown young man, and confidently declared that she wanted to force him to kneel. Raven never expected such shameless behavior, as they saw this girl for the first time in their lives. Therefore, he didn't know at all what to expect from her next, and grabbed the stranger's hands. The lady immediately noticed that the young master was still squeezing her wrist tightly. Princess Charlene replied that, contrary to the rumors, the young master's reaction was very naive and behaved like a puppy. She admitted frankly, and this made her want to tease the young man even more. Raven had already noticed that something was clearly wrong with this girl and asked to return to the topic they had started discussing. They sat facing each other in the gazebo, and the young man frankly admitted that he was against their joint engagement. Raven was sure that Princess Charlene was as opposed to this marriage as he was, and now it was not entirely clear to him why the girl agreed to this. Without thinking twice, the princess answered the young master's question and said, "It's all because she really likes him." Raven had already heard these words, and he remembered a girl who also confessed her love to him. He was sure that the true feeling hidden behind goodwill is usually ugly. And basically, the reasons why girls get married are not hidden in the fact that they love someone at all. And perhaps this young man simply has money, which he cannot spend even in a lifetime. Many women wanted to marry the gentleman in the hope that their future would be secure, and also because of his unique beauty. And everyone wanted to possess such a man and make him their own, so that no one else could look at him or cast an eye on him. This lady, who constantly confessed her love to the young master, was a princess. And she didn't change at all, like the people surrounding her. The heroes were completely unaware of her intentions and why she was trying to get close to his family. But he knew one thing. He definitely could not marry her, so he confessed to the princess his decision that he would only marry a girl who would truly love him. He told Charlene they had nothing more to talk about and that, unfortunately, whoever truly loved him definitely wasn't her. Therefore, Raven apologized and smiled maliciously, sure that the princess did not expect such a turn. He apologized again and prepared to leave, but Princess Charlene didn't even turn her head in his direction and remained simply silent. Raven was sure that this would be the end of their conversation and headed back to the estate with a calm soul. On the way, a strange thought struck him that the princess was, after all, an amazing girl, but this was for the best because he would never see her again. As Raven headed back to the estate, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest area and stopped because he couldn't take another step. Fortunately for him, a girl was nearby, who was one of the knights in the detachment, and immediately saw that the young man was feeling unwell. She ran to the captain and asked if everything was all right with him, making sure everything was completely fine with the young man. She asked what the situation was like, and the lady said that the first unit sent to check the restricted area encountered first-class monsters. The squad the young man sent to the Forbidden Zone should have easily managed the destruction of the monsters. But so far, monsters had never appeared after being enslaved. But somehow this time, the situation was completely different. In a gloomy and dark forest, shrouded in thick fog, bloodthirsty monsters lurked. Their eyes glowed with a bright red light, and sharp fangs portended imminent death. But suddenly, the quiet calm of the evening was broken by piercing screams and terrible cries. Suddenly, a crowd of terrible creatures jumped out from behind the trees. They were sinister and fierce with rough skin, long claws, and bared mouths, ready to fight. The knights, realizing they were facing a nightmare, quickly lined up in battle formation, with their swords shining in the dim moonlight. Shouts and clashes were heard everywhere as the shadows of the monsters clashed with the bright reflections of the knights' swords. And every hero knew that only by uniting could they defeat this horror that plunged the forest into panic and fear. The battle erupted with unprecedented fury. Bloodthirsty monsters, digging their claws into the armor, tried to crush the defense of the brave warriors. But the knights were not going to give up. The captain arrived in time to help and saw how the team of knights was fighting well and tried to deal with the cruel monsters. One of the knights admired the young master's skill with the bloodthirsty monsters, and that was the strength of the guardian. Raven shouted to the second and third squads to check if there were any more monsters in the forest. There were no casualties in this battle, but some of the knights were seriously injured, and it's not entirely clear if they would be saved if they returned right now. Raven ordered the first aid team to go to the estate right away along with the victims, so they would have a chance to save everyone. The young man ordered them to leave urgently and promised that everyone else would be waiting for them there. The captain gave the order, but the next second he was surprised that rose petals, seemingly out of nowhere, began to fly around him. And it is unknown how Princess Charlene herself appeared before him, who absolutely should not have been here. The girl admitted that, after their last dialogue, she was going home, but she overheard their conversation about monsters. Therefore, she used teleportation to see everything personally and verify the accuracy of the information. The princess said that miasma had spread throughout his body, but that she had the power to cleanse everything. Running towards the wounded knight, the princess paused for a moment to assess his condition, his face distorted by pain, and seeing his suffering, Charlene immediately concentrated all her energy. She took out an ancient amulet, decorated with bright emeralds, and cast a spell. Warmth floated in the air, and a soft light shone around her. At that moment, the knight felt the pain recede, and his wounds began to heal, and the princess's magical energy enveloped him like a warm blanket, restoring his strength and giving him confidence. Raven saw everything with his own eyes and couldn't believe it. Everything became clear thanks to one person. The healers of the empire are skilled users of divine power. But the princess possesses such immense divine power that she can easily change a situation in seconds. As the lady finished her magic ritual, a huge black monster appeared behind her, opening its pink mouth. Raven immediately feared that the princess might be in danger. But the next second, he realized that Charlene could take care of herself. With one deft blow, without blinking, she neutralized the monster and deprived it of all its vitality. The knights, who had just seen with their own eyes how a fragile girl confronted a group of monsters, they were surprised and delighted at the same time. At that moment, the lady turned around and admitted that her favorite pastime is killing monsters, in which she has no equal here. The knights couldn't believe it. She killed the huge monster with just a slap, and some even thought they were having real hallucinations because this couldn't be happening. And now Raven had no idea who this mysterious Princess Charlene really was. The girl immediately approached the young master, took his hand, and, unexpectedly for everyone, she promised to protect him always, if only the prince would marry only her. A luxurious carriage slowly moved along the quiet streets of the old city. Paved with stone, its wooden wheels emitted a soft but rhythmic sound, rolling over the uneven pavement, creating a feeling of comfort and tranquility. A young man was sitting in this carriage, and said that he was currently heading to the place of his death in the most wonderful weather. That day his life changed completely. All thanks to Mrs. Stella's public proposal. The knights were sure that the captain should immediately marry this girl, who skillfully dealt with huge bloodthirsty monsters. And they insisted on this. Wherever the captain went and whatever he did, there was a lot of pressure from the young men. And the knights eventually became her followers. Raven thought that, after all, her divine power should only heal. But for some reason, this fragile girl somehow managed to destroy the monsters. Divine power is a special energy that can fight monsters and miasmas. Unlike magic, which can be used by anyone, only the descendants of the two great ducal families can fully utilize this divine power. And those descendants are the family of knights and the healing family of Princess Charlene. There was no one who could wield both powers at once, except for one person, a holy girl who long ago saved the empire from certain destruction. On this beautiful sunny day, Raven received a letter, the content of which was very simple. And in it, the girl invited the young master to enter into an official contract marriage. Seeing such a bold proposal, the young man was very surprised that the girl still dared to offer him a deal. The lady who personally wrote this letter and invited Raven to become her fake husband was already waiting for the young master in one of the most luxurious restaurants in the empire. The young man quietly approached the princess and apologized for making her wait for some time. This restaurant had a very cozy atmosphere, and the princess suggested that if the young man liked it here, they could come back together. She admitted, her sister said, that this place is very popular among girls, but she wanted to get straight to the point. The princess agreed with the young master and proceeded to list the conditions for concluding the marriage contract. And the first of them was that his participation in conquering the demons was a prerequisite. The next point stated that the marriage would be valid until the master receives the title, and she renounces her assets and the rights of the duchess. Raven immediately understood that the lady was clearly plotting something, and that this girl was known for hating men. But he was curious to know why she wanted to marry him, and she even lied to him about her love. Most likely, she is deceiving for the sake of her goal, and there is no need to lie about her feelings, much less say that she truly loves him. A contract marriage doesn't always work, but with her power, the knights will no longer be in danger. Raven proposed marriage on these terms, and the princess affirmed that she was very glad that the young master listened to her and accepted. She said there were rumors that he was playing with the feelings of girls, and that there was a possibility that he might take a mistress while married. So Raven warned in advance that he could not make the princess happy. But the girl's fate was already extremely cruel to her, and she had already lost many things. So she was tired of constantly worrying about everything. Charlene promised that she would in no way regret marrying Mr. Raven. She observed that the young man seemed kind-hearted, but he had a special attitude that did not allow anyone to cross the line of what was permitted. His cold gaze, hidden behind a smile, made the girl feel a little cautious. But if she were in this position too, she would probably do something similar. But there is a reason why the princess needs to be close to him, and now she can continue implementing her plan. And she is ready to sign the official marriage contract. Suddenly, the princess began writing some kind of magic spell with her hand, and the young man hurried to stop her. He took her hand and shouted what the lady was doing, because they had not agreed to use magical powers. The princess said she had just signed a contract using magic, and was sure that Raven was a cold person. But now, he was angry with the person he once hated. The young man clutched his head and began to mumble that the lady was doing that because they hadn't agreed on anything. But the princess convinced him otherwise because nothing had changed, and earlier Raven had asked her if she would regret her signature, and if he was really worried about it. The girl gently touched his face with her fingers and whispered that she was sure the young man would not doubt her choice, and that he would soon fall in love with her for the first time in his life. Hearing these words, the eligible bachelor Raven shouted strongly at the lady to never dare to say words of love again, and the princess promised no more surprises, and even more so, she would never say the phrase that the young master would fall in love with her. But he was the one who first said this phrase, and no one had ever said such a thing to the lady before. Rumors are already circulating in the luxurious estate that the wedding of Mr. Raven will take place soon, and Princess Charlene of the family. The maids already knew that they needed to prepare the room for next week, so all this time they would have to do serious and responsible work. The maids were happy that a mistress finally appeared at the estate, and the first thing they were interested in was who would become her personal maid. But the other maid was interested in something else, and worried that the same calm atmosphere would remain inside the mansion. It is rumored that Mr. Raven has a girlfriend who is rumored to be his favorite, and Princess Charlene probably doesn't know anything about it. But no one at the estate had ever seen this girl, but many were already talking about the mysterious stranger. Outside, it was an unusually starry night, and the young knight was in his office, illuminated by a dim yellow light. The door opened slightly, and a lady entered the office, with a long veil hanging down to the bottom of her back. The young man saw that it was Catherine and was already waiting for her, asking if she had arrived safely. In sound, the lady said that everything was fine for her, and that the trip was more than successful. She approached the young man's desk, upon which there was a pile of scattered business papers. She asked the guest to wait a moment until she soon finished all these documents. But suddenly the girl, with a rough masculine voice, became indignant because he had come here dressed as a girl. And for some reason, he had to dress so terribly to receive a normal treatment. And all this was just so that on that day, the young gentleman would not be recognized, and the whole truth about the young master would not be revealed. The knight also performed a magical treatment that day, and Raven lay calmly on his bed while the ritual was performed. Suddenly, two young knights entered his bedroom. They saw everything and asked if everything was fine with their master. So the young man had to jump onto the bed and pretend that he and the long-haired lady were having a romantic affair. The knight had no choice but to leave the room as quickly as possible, because the knight said he was a little busy now and that the young men should probably leave him and his companion in peace. And it was from that night that the young gentleman had to dress as a girl every night so that no one would suspect anything. Therefore, he immediately asked her to fulfill one of his requests, and, to the knight's great regret, he could not refuse him. The young man admitted that he needed to hide from everyone that he needed treatment, and dragged Keith into this scam. This evening, he also came to continue his treatment and asked how the young master was. Thanks to the treatment, his condition improved significantly, and the young man was no longer sick and felt absolutely fine. But the knight knew that no one could ever hide anything from him, and Raven's mistake was that he didn't know how to lie at all. And the young man understood that even if he told Keith not to use divine power, he still wouldn't listen to him, and only the direct descendants of the dear family possessed the seal designating them as guardians. These people possess enormous divine power, incomparable to anyone else, and one person is capable of destroying hundreds of monsters. That is why treating the master is so troublesome, because Raven owns a powerful magic seal. Although he knew that healing divine power would cause death, he would continue to use it to protect his people as long as he had this power. And Raven was incredibly stubborn, because as a result, he immediately sacrificed himself to save the lives of others. The next day, the butler was with the young master and admired what an incredible day it was going to be. The man admitted that he had actually been waiting for this moment for so long, and that he probably shouldn't call the young gentleman Little Duke. In any case, an old man like him was relieved that his son would not die alone. The young man admitted that this girl is so simple that it defies his common sense. Princess Charlene was the type of girl who, when you first meet her, says she wants to bring you to your knees. On this beautiful, sunny summer day, the princess was traveling in her carriage, holding a pink book in her hands. It was a book called How to Make an Inaccessible Person Fall in Love, and the first step was to make an unforgettable impression on your partner. And Princess Charlene had already done that. The next important step was to show her lover what she was really capable of. And this point was also successfully completed. There was an important point in the book stating that if the lovers' bodies and minds were in disagreement, it was necessary to spend an exciting moment behind closed doors. And the princess wondered if next time they should be alone in a closed room. Charlene thought the young man would probably avoid this, but if she tied him up, this could surely solve all the problems. And the girl thought it was a good idea, being someone who only knows about love from romantic novels. The butler and the young knight were already awaiting the arrival of a luxurious carriage at the estate. The man immediately suggested that the young man personally greet the young lady who would arrive for an important meeting. The gentleman courteously offered his hand to the visiting guest so that she could carefully step down and exit the carriage. And at that moment, the cheerful Raven ran towards the lady with loud cries that he was truly waiting for the beautiful person who had arrived, calling her loudly, in front of everyone, his dear wife. That very night, the young man immediately asked what the reaction of those around him was to his unexpected engagement to the famous princess. The butler said that those who have worked here for a long time are incredibly happy to know this. But on the other hand, many people were from the imperial capital and were very worried about this, since everyone knew the rumors about the princess. However, this is not enough to cause any harm and probably not a cause for concern. The young man thought, maybe there are more evil rumors because the same thing always happens. Gossip has already said that the lady was the flower of the empire who won the hearts of many men. But it seems the duke definitely hates his wife. Society ladies only gossiped about how embarrassing it was, but supposedly each of them understood the duke's feelings. Many people thought it was funny that so many men felt something for her, but the man she fell in love with would never love her. And the little one with huge violet eyes only remembered how all of secular society laughed at his mother. But he had no choice but to defend his honor and that of his dear family with his head held high. The young man perfectly understood that now there was no way to know when the princess would become the subject of so many rumors. But even if that wasn't the case, the princess clearly wasn't very good at communicating. Raven ordered the third butler not to allow anyone he considered dangerous near the mansion, and to make sure the girl could spend her time without any inconvenience. And running towards the carriage from which his future wife was supposed to descend, the young man realized that a fun performance was beginning. Raven specifically called the girl his dear wife in front of everyone, so that no one would doubt the falsity of this marriage. He asked if the guest was tired after a long journey, and probably first needed to rest well in her new room. The new room for the young mistress was prepared by the best maids, and the princess apparently had to like it. And finally, the estate employees saw how their master brought a real bride here for the first time. Princess Charlene looked unflappable, as the young man did not hide his admiration upon seeing his new wife. They slowly exited the estate gates, and this meant that the young lady had finally appeared in this place. All the maids looked closely at the entering princess, and they couldn't take their eyes off the grace and elegance, and this couple fit incredibly well together, as if destiny itself had brought them together. They entered the room, and the young man said, "Cast a soundproofing spell, and now they can start a conversation." The lady suggested that the young man was probably too far away to start a conversation, and said that she didn't bite at all. But Raven was quite happy with such a long distance, and as soon as the princess tried to get closer and closer to the young master, he still moved away from the princess by the same distance. Charlene smiled and said, in that case, they should continue the conversation, and she considered the young man a real puppy lord. Raven agreed and thanked the girl for her understanding, seeing incredible malice and genuine in her eyes. As they smiled sweetly at each other, each understood that there were two angry animals in the same territory, and the lady was sure that the young man irritated her incredibly, and the only good thing about him was his cute face. The girl asked if the young man wouldn't feel uncomfortable if there were rumors that he had fallen madly in love with her. Although he doubts it, He even admitted that it's not that he completely trusted the princess. Even though they had a contract, he himself made the decision to marry her. And naturally, this concerns him incredibly. And the reason he treated her like a beloved person, while many nobles watched them, was to protect the girl from terrible rumors. The princess asked if the young man was already doing this minimum. Then spending the night with her was probably also part of his plans. Now Raven found himself in that unusual position, where his cheeks were covered by a bright blush. And he couldn't find the right words to answer. That same day, the commander of the second detachment, named Daniel, was sure that his captain had definitely gone crazy. The knights were supposed to spend time training, but for some reason, none followed the master's orders. The commander of the third detachment, named Asher, was also with them, who knew that Daniel couldn't hear anything at all. The commander of the third division, named Theo, was sure that these two were definitely in love, and that their wedding was real. Perhaps the knights will soon find out the answer to this question, but now, walking down the corridor of the estate, everyone noticed that some kind of magic had recently been cast here, and it was very similar to a soundproofing spell. The insidious Daniel suggested that this probably happened for some reason. He loudly opened the captain's office door and cheerfully asked why the young man was hiding in broad daylight. To the surprise of the knights, the young gentleman was not alone in the office beside him. There was a luxurious guest. The knights gasped in surprise, and this was truly unexpected for them, because none of them had ever seen the captain next to the girl. Raven shouted. Really, the knights were planning to leave him here alone, but he heard an unexpected question from the princess, because he himself invited her here. And Asher confirmed that if a man invites a girl into his house, he must take responsibility. And this is the direct responsibility of the captain. After a successful battle, the knights immediately headed to the bar to celebrate the well-finished battle with alcoholic drinks. Asher asked the captain if it was very strange that a young man was in a bad mood for so long. The naive Theo suddenly approached the captain and asked when he would finally have a child. Raven managed to choke on his beer and declared that this question was very unexpected for him. Thoughtfully, he raised his head and replied, "They are not in the relationship he thinks." And most importantly, Raven in no way wants to be like his parents. When he was still small, he dreamed that when he got married, he would form the happiest family in the world. Until one day, Sayago learned of his true destiny, which portended suffering in his early years. Ancient records said that a person who showed the guardian's seal would live a short life as payment. And this meant that due to a powerful force, the young man would have to die in the near future. After his ancestors founded the empire, monsters suddenly began to appear, and miasmas and the entire continent fell into chaos. When everyone was in line, the great saint and the guardian knight appeared, and the two erected a protective barrier that scared away all the monsters. And now people are protected by the Charlene family, which is responsible for purifying the miasma, and healing, as well as by the Deer family, which provides protection and subjugation of bloodthirsty monsters. Conquering monsters has always been a dangerous business, and, from the point of view of the group members, if a princess with powerful abilities participated in the raid, then it would be much easier to deal with the monsters. And now the first girl appeared in the night squad, who incredibly suited this elegant black uniform. The neighbors were very happy to see that their future venerable lady participated in the defense alongside the knights. And although everyone thought it would be a great trip, Raven couldn't feel normal. When they arrived at the location, the captain announced that from now on they would kill monsters together. And this is not just another festive party, but a real conquest of the monsters, where everyone must be responsible for their actions. Since the princess can destroy a monster with a slap, it was decided that from now on she would also participate in destroying monsters. But first, the captain decided to clarify something so that the knights would behave like worthy partners. The support team will definitely come anyway, and, in fact, they will continue to receive the usual support. Well, the young men, as before, will have to continue destroying cruel monsters with all their courage and stamina. One of the knights said that the door preparation was completed, and that the movement could start at any moment. The captain loudly declared that the knights should stop suffering, and that everyone should gather at the gate. Raven informed everyone present that they should move forward and also address the princess. Returning to that conversation, the young man asked, however, that it would be faster if the girl also participated in the destruction of the monsters. That's why he asked again if the lady had decided to leave them and change her plans. Because, as he said, uniting with the princess would be much more effective. But problems would likely arise after she left, when the knights had gotten used to that support in battle. Therefore, it would be more useful if the princess could cooperate with them and still be able to provide support. The young man promised to give his life in her lesson so that she could prove her worth and protect him in case of danger. It seemed they should make a great team, but all decisions depended on each of them. After being annoyed, Daniel happily said that today was incredibly fun to destroy monsters. And it was completely unexpected when the princess, with one blow with her own hands, killed the monster that attacked the support squad. The princess always paid close attention to the movements of the participants and supported them accordingly. And thanks to this, the conquest of monsters began to go better than before. The princess admitted that the monster attacked her first, and in fact, she did not try to stand out in any way in the battle. And at that moment, Raven seemed to see some kind of mysterious magic in this strange girl that attracted him more and more. The young man admitted that, nevertheless, the princess saved the lives of his medics, providing them great help in battle, and is definitely worthy of gratitude. The captain warned that the lady must now go to the support squad and ask to be cleaned of miasma damage. And for today, nothing more is required of the princess, but the lady grabbed the young man by the jacket and offered to clean him herself. Raven immediately started to deny it, because she was probably tired, but he did not resist and finally allowed her to take care of him. When cleaning and healing, the wider the area of contact with the skin, the faster the effects occur. The princess examined the young man's body, which was generally fine, but his magical mana was a bit stagnant, and the young master probably didn't sleep much. The princess advised him to rest more, but the young man didn't seem to listen to her at all, because the girl had just touched his naked body with her soft hands. Previously, the princess always felt a little uncomfortable when she was near Raven, but now she behaved with complete freedom. Many girls were in love with Raven that even neighboring countries knew about it, because each of them dreamed of being in his arms at least once. There were many rumors about him, both good and bad. Some also called Raven a terrible person who never respected the girls he dated. But no matter how bad the rumors were, his popularity never diminished and grew every year. The princess took the rumors circulating in high society about him literally, but now it seemed to her as if the young man had never had a girlfriend. It was already late at night at the estate when something unusual happened in the young master's bedroom. He was lying on his bed, and a young woman sitting on top of him couldn't believe this was their first time. Raven, excited, asked the girl to calm down and suggested that she first sit down and talk, but the girl in the light nightgown did not understand at all if the young master really wanted to have a conversation at that moment. And with each of her soft caresses, the young man wanted to scream more and more for her to stop immediately. And stop. Raven lay on his bed, with his eyes closed and shouting at the lady to stop immediately. But as he kept shouting, the knight dressed as a woman who was attending to him looked at him with contempt. As soon as the young master opened his eyes and saw the familiar knight in front of him, he immediately realized that he had simply fallen asleep. And he was incredibly happy that it was just a dream and that he had a real nightmare. The knight immediately understood what was happening and asked the captain if this girl had found out that he had never had a lady. He was sure that the reason the captain took advantage of the rumors that he liked playing with girls was to avoid marriage and family, but now that he is engaged to the princess, this is completely unnecessary. Princess Charlene now knows his secret, and he feels that he is succumbing to her influence. The knight tried to convince the young master that even if she found out everything, there should be no problems, but the young man was very nervous and very embarrassed. The young man admitted that today he did his best to be bad, but the knight said it was already too late to leave. At that moment, Princess Charlene rounded the corner and glimpsed a figure in a long dress and long, pink hair emerging from the young master's bedroom. The heroine immediately thought definitely a girl, but doesn't know who she is. 2 weeks have passed since the princess moved to live in Duke Gyre's mansion. Thanks to Raven's plan, his life has become very peaceful, and their relationship has progressed to the point where they call each other by their pile name. In fact, the princess thought so, but after observing the young man's reaction, she concluded that he had never truly fallen in love, and all the rumors that he is an unbearable womanizer can only be half true. The princess confessed to the maid that last night she saw a woman leaving Raven's bedroom, and the maid certainly could know something about it. The maid, without thinking twice, replied that she was very sorry, but she didn't know anything about it. But the princess clearly felt her hands begin to tremble violently. She immediately drew attention to this, because the maid was completely unable to stop the trembling that covered her whole body after these words. The princess did not interrogate the lady, and also said that she did not need to apologize under any circumstances. After all, she did not speak about her master's loyalty without his permission, and as a servant. She has something to be proud of. The princess also said she was glad to know that the maid faithfully serves her master, unconditionally fulfilling any order. And the maid noticed that for some reason, Lady Estella did not resemble the lady at all, about whom there were many rumors. She even thought that the princess truly loved the master, and otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to put such a kind expression on her face. The princess was sure that Raven had a different relationship with the girl she saw last night. But if a rival appears, then she will under no circumstances lose. Because after all, she is the one called the cruelest girl in the entire empire. And the princess's self-esteem did not allow her to think that there could be another girl who could be better than her. While the heroine was in the hallway, she noticed the young knights who were training in the courtyard, and realized that she should take some action. Among the training knights was a knight who had just wiped sweat from his face with Mikey after an intense training session. He warned the team that they should resume training at the training ground after the break. Raven's face immediately changed when he saw an attractive princess nearby walking straight towards him. The young man immediately became cautious, but Estella only invited him to lunch together today. She also wanted to know if the young master would like to have an official date with her tomorrow. The young man knew very well that when it comes to a date, everyone talks about it gladly and happily go out to dinner together somewhere. And after that, they start arguing furiously with their friends about how everything went last night with that same girl. Everyone always fantasizes that at the end of any date, he and that stranger had the hottest night that she will remember for the rest of her life. And recalling these words, Raven thought with horror that his date with the young princess should end exactly like this. Raven's biggest fear was that if he had a date with Estella, she would definitely do it with him, and would not back down. As soon as she found out about Raven's virginity, she immediately invited him out. And only the worst girl could do that. But given Estella's eccentric behavior so far, the young man's answer remained negative. Therefore, he rejected the princess's offer and explained it by the fact that he had a lot to do tomorrow. And the reason was not at all that he was afraid to see her. But before the young man had time to finish speaking, he felt someone pull him by the collar with all their might. And that is why he cannot take a single step and leave the princess with whom he just dialogued. The young man tried to take a step forward, but he could not understand why this fragile girl held him so tightly. She dismissed the young master and asked him again if he would really be busy tomorrow. And if he was going to lie, he better be careful. Raven admitted that he didn't mind having a date, but they had to return to the mansion before 7 p.m., and that was his main condition. He really hoped that if they were home by 7 p.m., the lady wouldn't attack him on a date. The girl said she agreed to such ridiculous conditions and held out her little finger in front of the young man's face, inviting him to make a promise to each other and seal this promise with the fingers of both hands. Raven did not understand what she meant, but the lady said that when a person breaks a promise, he will have to cut off his finger. The young man, feeling completely awkward, nevertheless grabbed the little finger of his future wife. As she wanted, the girl said they had just agreed, and if the young man ran away, he would be in trouble. The young man remained standing with his little finger extended, bewildered by what kind of strange ritual he had just undergone. Princess Charlene stood in the shade of the canopy of dense trees, and the magical sunlight played with multicolored reflections in her hair. When a person says bad words, they usually put their finger to their hand, and this sounds very strange. But the princess believed that when something like this is done, even the smallest promise becomes important and worth it. And as the young man said before, this is their little promise, where each of them pledged to love each other. This morning, the young master was incredibly perplexed by a question for which he had long failed to find an answer. Since early in the morning, he had been racking his brains about where he could take Princess Charlene on a date. They could take a boat ride on the lake, known for its beautiful scenery, watch a popular opera, or simply eat at a cafe. And for the young master, choosing one of these was incredibly difficult, even though at that moment he should have been busy with work. Asher entered the office and reported that the third squad had just returned from an investigation with the results, where monsters had appeared again. Monsters played there once every 2 or 3 years. And if we leave everything as it is, monsters will constantly appear, because such a phenomenon is rare, and the last time it happened was 60 years ago. A puddle of miasma is also called a sign that something strange is about to happen, and the year it happened was very unfavorable. Therefore, everyone must take immediate action and raise a barrier to confront it, and ensure that monsters never reappear. The captain was sure that this needed to be resolved as soon as possible, and suggested that they go alone right now. He told the knights that he had other plans for tomorrow and could not postpone them at all. Frankly, he promised Estella to have a date with her tomorrow, and under no circumstances could he change neither the date nor the time. The young men were indignant. Really, their leader preferred a date instead of destroying monsters, which he had been doing his whole life. Asher apologized and asked if the captain knew how to behave on a date, and if he wasn't sure, the young man could guide him. In fact, Asher knew that the rumors of the young man being a womanizer were false. But Raven refused any help and asked the knights to go rest, and under no circumstances forget to go to the doctor and clean themselves after the battle. Asher left. Although he was rejected, he still decided that the captain would need his guidance because he seemed very interesting. Night enveloped the forest with a soft and mysterious curtain, filling the air with coolness and mystery, where the young knight stood on a narrow path, looking into the darkness, where tall trees leaned over him, like guardians of ancient secrets. Amidst the quiet sound of the forest, his heart beat in unison with the rhythm of nature. The knight took a deep breath of the fresh air that entered his lungs, and realized that there was something more than darkness lurking in this forest. The young man knew that he could see something in this forest, and to his surprise, a huge puddle of miasma appeared before him. He extended his hand to use magic power to deal with the strange phenomenon. Since the hero sealed the mysterious puddle with strong magic, the danger of monsters will disappear. But to completely eliminate it, the young man must ask for purification from Charlene's family. For now, he needed to do another hunt, and definitely no one should know more about it. It was true that the young master agreed to have a date, but only because he thought it would be a good time. He was sure he could get closer to the princess, and they would have a nice time together. That night, Raven entered his office, hoping there would be no one there to heal him with magical powers. To his great surprise, there was a knight in the office who said that the captain was trying in vain to look healthy, and that it was completely useless. After all, it is probably unnecessary to maintain a facial expression that could disappear at any moment. Every night the treatment continued, and today the captain tried to heal the knight again. The young man asked why the knight decided to try so hard, because he could have had a date another day. Unfortunately, this time the young man had a very urgent matter, so it was better to postpone the date for another day. But unfortunately, he did not want to break his promises and had to make a difficult decision. The young man was also confused as to why he had gone to such lengths to keep his promise. After a while, they sat with the young princess in the carriage, and the girl stared fixedly at her companion. Raven immediately felt the attentive gaze of the princess, and it was strange, but she was still sitting silently. In Estella's favorite book, How to Make an Inaccessible Person Fall in Love, they said that you definitely need to spend an exciting moment behind closed doors. The girl kept staring at the young master, and the young man couldn't stand it anymore, and asked her what had happened. He asked out loud if Raven's heart didn't speed up when he looked at her. The young man found the question quite strange and asked what the lady meant. The girl fell silent and listened to the beating of the young master's heart. And he must have made a misstep, an unforgettable impression, since the young man's heartbeat was completely normal. In this case, she decided that if they became close, like in those romantic novels, the young master's attitude towards her would surely change. She pulled Raven closer by his shirt and looked intently into his eyes, still listening to his heartbeat. The lady asked if Raven felt any change in his body, and if his heartbeat had increased. But the young man simply smiled and said, when he is next to this girl, no matter how his heart beats, it is not enough at all. They arrived at the best boutique in the south, and the princess thought this place looked like a popular shop, of which rumors had even reached the imperial capital. A lady approached the guests and told them she was already expecting guests, and that it was a great honor for her to meet Princess Charlene in person. This girl was named Ada Blau. She was the owner and designer of a famous boutique throughout the empire. The young man laughed and replied. He came here to give his wife a beautiful dress and also wanted to choose a dress design for the banquet. Lady Ada said she would be delighted to show the latest collection of the newest designs. There were rumors about Princess Charlene. She is very selfish and easily loses her temper if she doesn't like something. Moreover, with the support of the dear family, she can completely wipe out what she doesn't like from the face of the earth. Therefore, the boutique owner has heard a lot about the princess, and if this is true, she will have to be careful not to offend the young lady in any way. At that moment, the young man was busy choosing jewelry for his new wife, who was supposed to look charming in secular society. Her blue dress flowed like a wave from the sea, hugging her figure and emphasizing every curve. And the fabric shimmered with every step she took, reflecting the light of the chandelier and creating the impression that the princess herself was surrounded by an aura of magic. Raven, upon seeing the girl in the new dress, no longer heard questions from Miss Ada. He answered confidently, "The princess looks incredibly beautiful, like a huge cute gorilla." In fact, there was no way he could tell the truth, and he couldn't give the girl a direct compliment. The lady decided that the young man seemed to have a problem in his head if he called her a gorilla, and she was sure that if she called, he would probably return to normal. The princess said that problems could arise with him, and that he should set an example of his ridiculous statement if he is not a coward. The fairy lady laughed, seeing how well the young people got along, and looked incredibly charming. Raven did not have time to answer. He only saw the silhouette of the shop owner walking away, who went to buy a new suit. He asked if it was really necessary to try on another dress, since the previous one was beautiful. The princess believed that what the young man had said before was only minimal obligations, and if it concerns a gift designed to protect her, she most likely won't need it in the future. The young man did not consider this an obligation, but only a thank you, because the princess saved the lives of many members of the detachment. And besides, she came from the north and perhaps did not have many dresses suitable for the climate. And that's why the young master decided to give her a gift. In fact, the dress Estella wore yesterday must be too hot in the south at this time of year. She could have used this as an excuse to ask for a new dress, but still, he insisted. She did not need more clothes, and one dress would be enough. Raven said that if the lady is worried about money, then the dear family has no financial problems. And even if he bought all the goods in this store, it would not affect him. Therefore, he would be happy if the girl accepted all the gifts without hesitation and with sincere joy. When Raven first met her, he thought the lady was arrogant, but now that he saw her clumsy side, he wanted to know her better. And now he clearly felt that it seemed the young man really had problems or issues with his head. Since his thoughts were occupied with only one girl, he asked Estella to wait a while, and he himself reached out for the huge blue box lying on the table. He asked permission to touch the girl's hair, and the lady said with interest that she wouldn't mind. Raven held a hairpin with pearl flowers in his hands and said he saw it and thought the decoration would look great in his future wife's hair. And he was right all along too. She looks incredibly beautiful. The luxurious hairpin really made the girl look incredibly cute, and Raven had never chosen the right jewelry. The excited Princess Charlene saw, for the first time, that the cold young man was so courteous and sweet. Raven gave the princess hair accessories, but judging by her expression that instantly changed, he should have started to be afraid. The young man laughed and said that in no way was he talking about her, and although he gave such a compliment suddenly, it was aimed solely at the hairpin. The very next second, Princess Charlene left the hall with a dissatisfied face, followed by the young gentleman. As a result, the young man bought all the clothes she tried on, and especially the dresses that suited the girl. He admitted that his nose still hurt from the blow, but Estella was sure he got what he deserved for his words. The young man asked if the princess was tired of trying on so many dresses, and nearby there was a cafe that was popular in the empire. But the princess declared confidently that there was another place she would rather go to. As the young master and the princess walked through the city streets, every resident greeted Raven. The princess noticed that the atmosphere here is different from the north, and seeing how he behaves simply lifts her spirits. And the common people rejoice. Since she learned that Raven liked this place, she wanted to visit it and see with her own eyes how ordinary people live. Accidentally, she noticed how a young couple was holding hands and decided that it was time to take a responsible step. Charlene carefully took the hand of the young gentleman and saw him writhe in a second with hostility. He withdrew his hand, and Lydia was indignant at the rude reaction, wondering if the young man really thought she had decided to break up. But Raven mumbled uncertainly. The girl's hands were simply cold, and this made him take his away. The princess turned away in displeasure and said, "In this case, they can never hold hands, and she will simply move on." She seemed annoyed, and the young man immediately assumed that she must have thought he had just complained. While the lady was carefully examining the wicker baskets, passers-by began to pay attention to her. One of the men asked if the girl was really the same Princess Charlene. Even more people gathered around her, who clearly recognized the girl as the princess about whom there were many rumors. One of the ladies said she just saw a lady with a young gentleman, and they look incredibly cute. The princess assumed that these people probably knew rumors about her, and this girl was as kind as Lord Raven. However, this was the first time so many people treated her kindly, so the princess did not know how to respond. She decided it was better to remain silent, so as not to cause new gossip for the heroine. But one of the girls in the crowd was annoyed. The princess still hasn't answered them, and probably just doesn't want to talk to common people. Suddenly, the princess heard one of the girls tell her friend that she somehow resembled a real witch. The lady was very worried that people would start calling her a witch and announce the appearance of new monsters, deciding to sacrifice her later. After all, Princess Charlene has always been the first person about whom an incredible amount of false rumors circulated. A young knight approached Estella, placed his hand on her shoulder, and looked into her eyes tenderly. He said he was very happy because his wife is very popular, and they are having a date now. And he asked the commoners not to stop them. The ladies were indignant as to whether they had done something wrong, but in the end, they decided to part ways so as not to bother the young couple. One of the kind men smiled at the princess and suggested that if the girl didn't mind, she could always come back to them. The princess walked slowly to the fountain and decided to sit on the concrete edge to rest a little. Raven seriously feared that a fight might break out because the princess was called a witch. But this time, he didn't answer anything. Moreover, it seemed to the young man that she had abandoned everything, thinking it would be useless to answer anything. He said confidently that there was no need to leave the princess alone in such an unusual place. The young man knew many people here since childhood and should have told her in advance so that it would be easier for the girl to talk to people. But she was sure that the young master was not to blame at all. At that moment, Raven, while the girl was upset, gave her a toy in the shape of a black cat with blue eyes that incredibly looked like a princess. He said that he accidentally saw the toy in one of the shops and bought it immediately. The young man admitted that there are many other interesting things to see here, and the princess won't even notice how quickly the whole day passes. He enthusiastically extended his hand and offered to continue their wonderful date. They walked slowly down the street and ate delicious ice cream with fresh strawberries in a waffle cone, sprinkled with chocolate chips. While the young man was calmly enjoying his ice cream, he noticed that the lady was looking at him strangely. After a long walk, they decided to return to the estate, and the pleased heroine carried an unusual toy in her hands. As a reminder of the past evening, when she thought about it now, she felt like she was drowning in his kindness. Estella asked if they had known each other for a short time, but why was the young man so kind to the stranger? After hearing the words spoken from her mouth, she still did not know that she would regret it for a long time. The young man asked why the princess was asking that, but the girl was really interested. She really wanted to know why Raven was as kind to her today as he was, even if he didn't trust her completely. The young man smiled and replied that he could not trust the girl, because he did not know the reason why she decided to marry him, and he wanted Charlene to answer his question, and the young man was very annoyed that she hadn't said it before. And the real reason for their marriage contract is only because all the knights treat her well. After one of the battles, the knight lent it to the captain. The princess expelled all members of the detachment, and it seemed to her that she had really decided to cooperate so late. That day, she learned that she also wanted to clean him and was waiting for the captain to arrive. But Kate convinced her to go to bed because she could not realize that Raven was having seizures. Observing this girl, the young man concluded that whatever her intentions were, she harbored no hostility towards his family. And the reason she finds it so easy to interact with him is because she doesn't really like him. Hearing this, Princess Charlene did not immediately believe that the young man had really said those words. And Raven sincerely admitted that he was very happy that there were no romantic feelings between them. And if the girl had liked him from the beginning, they would never have entered into a contract marriage. Hearing this, the lady lowered her head, but the young man was sure that she must be angry. The girl asked what would happen if she really fell in love at that moment, and all her feelings were sincere and incredibly strong. But Raven was completely sure that this should never happen, and no one could have sincere feelings for him. He said that at that moment their contractual relationship would end, and they might never see each other again. That night, the girl lay in her bedroom, buried in a pillow, and a black plush cat was sitting next to her. That night, Princess Charlene felt incredibly lonely, but she cheered up when she saw the donated toy next to her. She imitated Raven, who talked about ending the contractual relationship, and burst out laughing. And then, with all her anger, she moved the pillow against the wall. And these words turned out to be incredibly offensive to the girl. And she knew that even if Raven said he wanted to know the reason for the marriage, he would never believe her, even if she told him the whole truth. Estella hugged the toy with all tenderness and thought, this is only because in a past life, they were really a royal couple. A year ago, at a National Day banquet, an event occurred that changed the lives of many people. The princess remembered her previous life, the night she first saw the young master. That day was no exception, when she was tired of the boring pastime and stupid communication in secular society. The princess could not tolerate something she didn't like for long, so she was preparing to return home when she learned of the arrival of Lord Raven. It was said of this young man that he was the eldest son of the York family and that he often did strange things, trying to please someone so that everyone would be in a good mood. The moment she first saw him, time seemed to stop for Princess Charlene. The charming Raven behaved freely, and his smile shone brighter than the most distant stars. The feeling of loss that had tormented her heart for no reason until then was now filled with melancholy. But for some reason, the lady felt joy because of it. She longed with all her heart that the young master had forgotten all the wonderful moments they spent together. And now he acted as if he were unfamiliar with this girl and was supposedly interested in the attention of other women. The princess had wanted to know him for a long time, and that day she didn't even speak to the young man, and the only thing she could do was run away. She was sure that Raven was an unpleasant idiot, but destiny still brought them together. And they met again. The girl was incredibly scared, because seeing the young man in front of her, she feels completely lost. And if the young man had kept those memories, he would probably have hated her. In fact, Princess Charlene didn't even notice, let alone remember all the events. But unfortunately, nothing mattered much to the girl, and she was here only because she had previously promised to do everything possible for the young master's happiness. Coming here, the princess was happy to be by his side, but after his past life, she decided to live to amend the young man, and was sure that now she would be punished for her greed. The next day at the training ground was very busy, and the captain thought he needed to choose a knight and a personal maid for Estella. Raven suddenly turned around when he heard someone call him his boy. The young man only managed to see the butler in front of him, whose mood changed every minute. He approached the young man and told him that he now needed to go to the main entrance, and that this was too much. He admitted that he did not understand at all what happened, and why the man was behaving strangely. Suddenly, a child appeared in front of him, and suddenly asked him if Raven was actually his father. Raven admitted that in this case, he would have to leave, and near the main entrance he saw a knight and his future wife. It seemed that today everything was going as usual, and Princess Charlene was going to visit a bookstore this afternoon. The young man was worried whether he had understood correctly today, and if the girl had the strength to go for a walk. The knights were still discussing the situation experienced in the city when the captain had to defend the honor of the young princess. His wife became incredibly popular, and the knights spoke with special enthusiasm and pride, showing how omnipotent their captain was. They admired how the captain suddenly appeared and protected the girl with just one sentence. But now the knights who accompanied the date hid in the corners upon seeing the young princess. Daniel also couldn't stop talking about how nicely the captain gave the cat to the girl. Raven no longer wanted to hear the praise all over the area, so he gave Daniel a cheerful hit on the head and laughed. The knights have time to discuss ridiculous things, but they should start training right now. After such a bold order, the young men immediately fell silent and stopped talking about the captain's personal life. Raven had to choose a knight and a maid for the young mistress, so that she could go whenever she decided to go somewhere. The butler reminded the knight that he now needed to approach the main entrance. The young man suddenly saw behind the man a child who definitely shouldn't have been here. In fact, there was a small child standing next to the butler, wondering if Raven was really his father. The child laughed upon seeing how scared the young man was by his question. And Theo, luckily, appeared at the wrong moment, seeing the boy who had just called the leader father, like in a novel about an illegitimate son. Before unnecessary rumors spread, Raven asked everyone to stop, saying that this was definitely not his son. The young man perfectly understood that he could not have children because he did not have a girlfriend yet. He sat in front of the child and politely asked where the wonderful child came from. The child had incredible blue eyes, like a clear, cloudless summer sky. Suddenly, the child's eyes filled with tears, and he asked if he was telling the truth, if the young master would kick him out. The young man promised, of course, that this would not happen, but in reality, he was the one who was going to send the child back. The heroes thought for a moment and decided to change the question, asking the child how old he was. He showed 4 fingers, but then said that this year he will turn 6 and that he is old enough. Daniel saw no sense in this, because his leader was only 24 years old, and at that moment, the leader had just graduated from the academy when this child was born. The young man tried to calm the knights, and Daniel had already received a punch in the face for his ridiculous expressions. And in any case, he was sure that son could not be his in any way. The baby looked at the young master with innocent eyes, and the young man was completely unable to resist his sweet childish charm. Raven noticed a surprising resemblance between the unknown boy and his appearance as a child. Therefore, the young master could not understand at all what was happening here, and why this unknown boy looked so much like him. Keith approached them, and when he heard what the captain was saying, he decided he was completely crazy. Keith declared that he went to the academy with him. Raven studied enough and graduated as the best student in his class, and after graduation immediately, he began to participate in raids to conquer monsters. And as everyone knows, he was so busy that the young man didn't even have time to play like he does now. So the probability that this is an illegitimate son is completely low. And probably, instead of discussing the situation, they should show their new guest the property. Keith asked the boys to stop banging their heads and to start raising the child, who is probably interested in what is happening here. After a while, Raven himself asked how things were going with the unknown boy. They told him not to worry. Theo and Daniel are now having fun with him. The young man was grateful that the knights knew how to get along with children. But now, it was important to talk about this child. The butler said that the details of what happened were still being determined, but that he had just checked his belongings. The child is clearly related to Estella, and a member of the family of Viscount Chevest. It was strange that the lady was also involved in this, and the butler warned that they still didn't know much. However, it seems that the Chevest family is deeply in debt, as the head of the family has become involved in gambling. In the past, children have been sold to the head of the family several times, and it is also common for aristocrats to adopt children. Although they say they are adopted, in reality these children are sold, and valuable children are sold to a rich aristocrat. However, they allowed such a little one to come here alone, and for the moment there was no more information. Keith suggested that whatever the Viscount's intentions were, there was no way they would agree to his terms. And if something bad happens, they will have no choice but to get rid of this child. Keith suggested that they immediately have to send the baby back to his family. This sounded incredibly strange to the young master, and he did not want to have any problems with other families. He stated that even if it was troublesome, under no circumstances would they abandon this child. And probably someone simply forgot the promise he made to him when they were still children. These young men knew each other since childhood, and when they were children, they considered themselves best friends. Raven suggested ending the conversation on this note, as much was unknown at the moment, and it was too early to pass judgment. He asked his butler and Keith to leave the office, because their conversation had reached a definitive conclusion, and the young man himself could not stop thinking about the unknown boy who, under strange circumstances, appeared on his estate. The thought that it was not his fault at all that Keith started behaving completely differently also crossed his mind. Katie Lopez was the heiress of the Count Lopez family, and it was a family that had served the Jair family since ancient times, and they would do everything possible to protect that family. The Deer family is the only one capable of dealing with the protective barrier that spans the entire continent. So the members of the family are often targeted not only within the empire, but also in other countries. A family born to be loyal to the deer, family is ready to commit murder and other secret missions to protect them. And this was the Lopez family. Therefore, the children of the family were carefully trained from childhood. And Keith used to be more dangerous. And thinking about it now, Raven could not understand if things had improved a bit. But he learned one thing. Now everything was not going perfectly, and he just wanted the young man to live a normal life. Princess Charlene was in the library tonight, unable to make an exhausting decision. She held 2 different books in both hands and slowly looked from one to the other. One book was about how a girl switched places with a prince, and now her heart beats wildly. And the second book tells about the love story of a court lady and a maid. Asher decided to help the girl with her choice, and told her that if she wanted to experience a fun feeling, then she should choose the book on the right, and if she is looking for a tense story, she can take the book on the left hand. The young man admitted that he had read them a long time ago, but in reality, it was only knowledge gained from ex-ladies. Princess Charlene left a book in her hands and carefully examined its title. She chose a romance novel about a girl switching places with a prince, and followed Asher's advice. The young man had seen the princess several times at banquets, and she was always like a curled-up cat. And every time the lady was completely alone, while the court ladies always communicate with someone. The young man unexpectedly said that he had heard of a very good way to hint to his partner about the current situation. Asher thought that the princess was incredibly cute and understood why the captain was so worried. And anyone would worry if suddenly someone behaved harshly. The princess could not stop thinking about the young man's words, who openly admitted that he was happy, and that there were no romantic feelings between them. Therefore, she openly told Asher that this topic had absolutely nothing to do with her. The young man had no choice but to think if the princess really didn't like her leader at all. The princess knew she had to say it, but she couldn't say the important words, even if they were a complete lie. The young man got worried. It seemed he had said something wrong, and he apologized to the lady, considering the question a little rude. As soon as the child saw Princess Estella coming down the stairs, his childish face began to shine with the bright colors of happiness. He called the lady loudly by name, and with shouts of joy, he hurried to run in her direction. The baby carefully and lovingly hugged Princess Charlene, who almost fell over from such a strong hug. She called the child Naru and asked him why he was here. He said that the lady probably forgot that she promised to be his mother and adopt him when she finally got married. The girl carefully stroked the child's head and confirmed that she had indeed told him that. She asked Raven not to misunderstand her, and it was just a verbal agreement between her and Naru. The young master watched attentively what was happening and asked his future wife to explain where this child came from. He said that this child is the son of Viscount Chavez Cheveste's third wife, and that the child's name is Naru Cheveste. The Viscount is the younger brother of his father, which makes Naru his cousin. The princess said that her relatives gather at the mansion once a year, and during that time, she met a special child. It all happened a year ago at Charlene's estate, when the princess and Naru were having a nice time on a cold afternoon by the fireplace. The lady was reading an interesting book, while the boy was busy with his children's matters. He always wanted Estella to be his real mother, and they often even drew pictures together. On one of those warm and cozy evenings, the boy asked if he could become Estella's son. He admitted that his real mother had died a long time ago, when he was still very young. And then the princess replied, "If Naru really wants this, I will happily agree to become your beloved mom." However, now this was completely impossible, and for this to happen some time would have to pass. The lady considered the task too difficult, because adopting a child would take an incredibly long time, and she could only adopt him when she got married. Finally, she confessed everything to Mr. Raven, and after hearing what he heard, he couldn't even find the words to answer. He asked, in any case, the princess had previously said that she had no other intentions for this marriage. The princess noticed that no plan had occurred to her, and that Naru is not what the young master thought. Even before remembering her past life, she said something irresponsible, and Daniel was still convinced that this was the illegitimate son of their leader. The princess, upon hearing these words, immediately changed her face, as if she had heard something terrifying, and admitted in front of everyone that, in reality, the child was really his son. But the young man asked not to joke like that again. He was sure in the first place that he and the princess had never met before. The lady unexpectedly admitted that she had already seen the young man before, and she was incredibly curious to know if they could discuss it when it was only the two of them. The young man offered to prepare a guest room for the child so he could soon rest and regain strength. The girl took the child's hand, and at that moment Raven experienced some strange sensations, as if these two were incredibly close to him. That night, Naru fell asleep very quickly, and the excited princess hurried to her bedroom to check how the child was feeling. She saw him sleeping deeply in bed and didn't even hear the lady open the door and enter. She saw that the child was lying without a blanket and decided to approach him to cover him because he might catch a cold. But at that moment, she saw something terrifying. And this could not have happened at all, and there were some very suspicious marks on the child's body. After the death of Naru's mother, the princess knew that the child was not being treated well, but the bruises covering the child's entire body were a serious warning. And the girl immediately asked what happened. The caring princess took the child's hand and asked if he felt any pain in his body. The princess was very worried that the child was probably in pain due to the large number of bruises on his body. He said confidently, nothing hurt him, and buried himself in her soft pillow. He turned around and asked quietly if the girl was angry because he had arrived without official permission. But the princess said, who could be angry at a boy as cute as him? The lady carefully covered Naru with a blanket and asked him to sleep deeply instead of having bad thoughts. But the boy was very worried because he had arrived without notice and might cause inconvenience to someone else's family. Therefore, he immediately decided to apologize for bothering the young princess. And after these words, he fell fast asleep. The next day, the young master, his future wife, and their baby Naru had breakfast at the luxurious dining table. Raven had never been close to small children and looked cautiously at the new guest. He saw that the child still hadn't touched his food and asked him if he really didn't want to eat anything. The child was very worried and in great excitement dropped the knife that was on the table onto the floor. Naru immediately remembered how he was mercilessly beat every time he made a mistake, shouting that the child was completely useless, so the child was sure since childhood that he shouldn't wear clothes. Raven immediately noticed that the child was scared and carefully placed his hand on his shoulder. Understanding that Naru was simply very scared, the young man happily turned around and asked for his plate so he could cut the meat for the child himself. No one had ever treated Naru with such kindness, so the child looked at the young master with surprised eyes. And kind, Raven noticed that these utensils were not intended for children, and it was probably difficult for a child to use them. The young man carefully cut the child's meat into pieces and happily declared that the child should eat more to grow big and strong. This day was incredibly special for Naru because everyone on the estate paid a lot of attention to him. After breakfast, the knights asked Naru to show his skills, and everyone rejoiced in unison at the baby's success. Naru actually possessed magical magic and could create a magical glow. The child was very happy to be able to use divine power like true mages, as expected of a relative of the Charlene family. Daniel asked the captain if he really wanted the child to join the knights in the future, and he was sure that Naru could be useful to them. Raven noticed that the baby was still a child and that someone should probably look after him. Daniel confidently stated that it could be an excellent option, and although the young man seemed single, he actually already had 5 children. Daniel warned, report completely without jokes and take seriously the idea of joining. The princess, observing her children, knew very well that Naru recognized adults' facial expressions very well. Although her own son has already disappeared, the Viscount's family hasn't even bothered to look until now. Knowing that the child has been away from home for a long time, Princess Charlene asked the knight if everything was fine after such an incident. She believed that the child was incredibly happy with his new friends, and she had never noticed him so happy before. The lady cautiously approached Raven and told him she wanted to talk about Naru. The young man admitted that he had also thought about it, and after a while, they were sitting opposite each other in the meeting room. He apologized for the urgency, but warned that he had an important request regarding baby Naru. The princess sighed and asked if Raven could let Naru stay on his property while she was here. Raven listened to the young princess's request, and without hesitation, declared that the child could not stay here under any circumstance, and this child will soon be returned to the Viscount's family, where he belongs. Princess Charlene now knew how negative the young man was regarding the child living on his property, and she was delighted to send him back. The The lady noticed that when her marriage contract is completed, she will definitely take this child with her and leave and never interfere with the master and his life again. The young man warned that no matter how many times the girl asked him, the answer would not change, and he could not protect this child, and even if everyone makes fun of him, he cannot in any way influence his future destiny and make him happy. Raven asked the princess if she knew what greedy people would think of him, and selfish in this case. If Naru is a poor child, then it is very possible that he is protected, and this can be interpreted that way. And if the people around him found out, they would try to contact the family. And it is possible that now there are more people than ever trying to sell children. And that is why children are subjected to terrible things like this defenseless child. Princess Charlene perfectly understood that Mr. Raven was telling the truth. And if she accepted Nara into her family, there would probably be people who would want to get close to the dear family. But she also didn't know what kind of terrible things would happen if she sent Naru back, considering that he had numerous bruises on his body from the beatings. Estella understood it perfectly, but at least the child could be protected by Charlene's family, and she wondered if she could get permission from Raven's father. The young master asked why the dear family needed to take such extreme measures, given the situation of the young princess. After all, he probably forgot. Their marriage is just fake, and they are complete strangers to each other. The young man reminded the princess again that this is just a marriage under an agreement. That binds them to nothing at all, and all conditions are written on paper. Princess Charlene admitted she was wrong and asked to accept an apology for the inconvenience. And this will not happen again in the future. But somewhere deep in her being, she hoped the young master would allow the child to stay. But unfortunately, her plan was not meant to come true. And it was at that moment that a small and lonely child stood outside the door who, unfortunately, overheard the entire conversation. This day was especially sad for Naru, and the child was not happy at all, not even with the sweets that had always lifted his spirits before. Princess Charlene noticed that the child seemed sad, so she asked him what had happened. It was clear from the baby that he was very worried about something, and, sighing, called the girl by her name. Naru prepared for a long time to confess his feelings, and said that he really just wants to go home. The princess assumed that the child seemed to have overheard their conversation, and this probably caused him mental trauma. She assured the baby that if he didn't want to go home, then it wasn't necessary, and he didn't have to worry about causing annoyance or trouble to anyone here. She took the child by the hands and admitted that he wouldn't have to return to the Viscount's house, and that she would do everything possible for it. But the child only replied that he was really tired of being here, because there was no Viscount or toys, and it was incredibly boring here, and that's why he wants to go home, and he doesn't understand at all why Estella doesn't allow him to do so. The next day, a carriage stopped in the courtyard of the estate, and the residents of the estate crowded around it. A small boy stood in front of the carriage, holding a huge suitcase in his hands, looking at the people who were bidding him farewell with naive and childish eyes. The child thanked everyone for their help and carefully said that it was time to set off for home. There was sadness in his heart, because today he would have to leave a place that was not just a place for him, but also a home full of memories and warmth. As the moment of departure approached, his heart filled with an unbearable feeling. And dark, he began to cry, and huge tears rolled imperceptibly down his cheeks. Every moment was like a vivid picture in his memory album, and now everything seemed very distant. And in fact, the baby did not want to go home, and he wanted to be here with everyone, and he would prefer that Princess Charlene never argued with anyone because of him. Naru cried, but he was sure that everything would be fine, and he must face all the adversities that fate had in store for him. This afternoon, the young knight stood before a huge portrait of his family. The young man carefully examined every detail, and this picture always seemed the dearest to him. The butler asked. It was already dark outside, and the young man was still here. Mr. Naru had just left, and the young man admitted that meeting this boy was too troublesome for him. The man looked at the knight for a while, as if trying to understand what the young man was hiding, because his heart was not so callous in reality. He asked if the young man regretted chasing the boy away from the estate so quickly. When Raven looked at the photo, he kept remembering his son as a child, and he looked incredibly similar to Naru. He was the type of boy who constantly got hurt to protect his servants, and Naru's story resonated incredibly with him. Henry wondered if it was abnormal to be selfish from time to time and put one's own desires before others. He asked Raven the most important question: did he really not want to protect Mr. Naru? And surely, the young man should think only about this question. The young master admitted that he trusted himself to make the right decision, and that this child should live in his own home. He patted the butler on the shoulder and informed Henry that the man was too old to be so sentimental about something like this. And then the young man decided to leave first, so as not to listen to Henry's tearful speeches about the unknown boy. This day turned out to be extremely quiet, and the young man walked down the empty corridor thinking that he really wanted to protect this child. Even if this were true, Raven felt that he could not take responsibility, since they knew how long he could live, and therefore could not do anything that would leave the problem unsolved. And although the young master seemed like a heartless person to everyone, he was the only one who knew that he could not protect everyone until the end. The next day, Estella's room was noisy since morning, and for some reason, the lady was packing her things into a suitcase. The maids wondered why the princess was packing, but she admitted that she was returning to her parents' house. The maids could not contain their emotions and began to cry, but the lady asked them not to worry and that they should just go and rest. The princess said that she would like to ask Mr. Lopez something and asked where she could find him at that moment. The maid said that at that time, the young master usually sits in his office and works, and a few seconds later, she saw Estella disappearing from the room. Yesterday, the princess could only silently bid farewell to Nara, and in this situation she was powerless. She perfectly understood that the dear family had no intention of protecting this child, and Mr. Raven made that clear. Despite the need to publicly demonstrate this fact, now that the dear family has expressed their intentions, the princess has no choice but to act on her own will so that Raven and others will not take any responsibility. Keith was sitting in his office, dealing with team problems when someone unexpectedly knocked on his door. The young man, without being distracted from signing commercial documents, invited the unknown guest in. To his surprise, Princess Charlene herself entered the office and politely informed him that her visit would only last a minute. The princess's appearance was strange in itself, and Keith cautiously waited to find out why Estella decided to visit him. He asked the girl to sit down, but she thanked the young man and said it wasn't necessary, and that she would soon be forced to leave. She said she wanted to return to her parents' house for about 2 weeks, and asked if this would conflict with the plan to destroy the monsters. Because 2 weeks was too long, the young man suggested that if the lady returned because of the child, it would surely be difficult to deprive the Viscount of guardianship through formal procedures. The princess confirmed his assumption and asked again if this procedure was formal. According to imperial law, minor children are treated as if their lives belong to their parents. And it's not just that they grew up in terrible conditions like Naru, all because it's impossible to give up parental authority. Therefore, the princess proudly admitted that no matter what method she had to use, she was going to force the Viscount to give up his parental authority. At that moment, a young knight entered the office and asked how to understand the fact that his future wife and the detachment knight were in the same office. To his great surprise, a happy baby Naru was sitting in Raven's arms, whom he did not expect to see here at all, because he personally sent him home in a carriage recently. The cheerful-eyed boy hurried to hug the beloved Estella and was very happy to be here again. The princess asked why the young man was doing this, because he categorically opposed Naru living here. Raven admitted that old Henry's words must have worked, and that night he met with Mr. Raven to talk urgently. The man admitted that he was just an old man working here, but the young man should listen to him now. He said that he had seen a document stating that even minors with divine abilities could fight without their parents' consent and join the group of their own free will, and this was probably done for Mr. Naru. It turned out that they now have Mr. Hand detained without the consent of the guardian, and it would not even be strange if they said he was kidnapped, but if these documents are approved, they will not be able to officially welcome Mr. Naru. The young man asked. Henry perfectly understood that everything that is happening now is for a reason, and even if everything goes well, many will be against this child, and hostile families may attack at any moment. In reality, Raven was very worried that for some reason he could not be there at that moment, and he could not protect anyone else, so, as a member of the ducal family, he could not make such a selfish decision. The butler replied sadly. His son put too much on his shoulders, but everyone needs support in life. He remembered very well that in Raven's childhood, there were many frightening situations that damaged the child's mental state. He took the young knight by the hand and told him that he would gladly share his heavy burden with him. Wherever he was, Mr. Raven has a loving family in whom he can always rely and trust any of its members, because the young man will surely go through difficult times. But whatever happens, Henry promised his master when he was a child that he would definitely help him with everything, no matter what happened. And now Mr. Naru also needs a person who can say and instill faith that everything will be fine in his life. In fact, the butler had become very sentimental, and the young man watched how the man had just revealed his soul and his thoughts, and he was incredibly grateful to the young master for his trust and his kind heart. Princess Charlene walked with little Naru, who greatly enjoyed living on the estate. The young master was heading towards them to look into the girls' happy eyes. Their laughter echoed throughout the garden like enchanting music, and they kept walking, creating new games, chasing butterflies, imagining they were brave knights, and beautiful princesses fighting imaginary dragons. The young master saw how incredibly happy the princess was to be with Naru, and he wanted to call Estella so they could talk. The young man called the lady by her name, but to his great surprise, the girl didn't even answer. And to his horror, Raven now realized that he still had a long way to go to regain the young princess's trust. Asher always considered Daniel's actions cowardly and often asked him to fight him one-on-one. But suddenly, a voice came from behind them, declaring that he could quickly get rid of even the most fearsome demon king. Theo slowly turned around while Daniel yelled at Asher that the weak always complain, and then they lose. The mischievous Naru approached the knights, raised his hand, and said loudly, "He is the true demon king, the most powerful and terrifying, and everyone should be afraid of him." The knights supported the child's game and fled from him in different directions with loud screams, feigning wild fear. Everyone knew that if Naru had divine power, even without his parents' consent, he could become the young master's disciple. The young man said there would be no problem with His Majesty's permission. He initially wanted to focus on raising the next generation, and in any case, this good idea will be approved in the near future. Raven is His Majesty's friend, so Princess Charlene was sure that everything would be fine, and she would tell Naru the good news herself. She also promised to talk to his father so that his family could also help them. But it turned out that Raven had already talked about everything. Estella carefully examined the papers, and the girl's energy showed that she was incredibly happy. Raven chose the right moment and decided to admit that he deeply regretted saying those cruel words the other day. But the lady unexpectedly replied that she considered those words correct, and that if they were done with the conversation, she should leave. After the apology, Raven exhaled and indeed felt much better, knowing that the princess did not hold a grudge against him. After all, the most important thing is that Naru is safe now and can also become a healer, like Princess Charlene and the others. Estella warned the child that he would only start practicing when he grew up a little, and until then, he would study the basics of divine power. The child, of course, was impatient to learn everything about magic, but he was willing to learn and acquire good knowledge to become a great healer in the future. He turned to the princess and said that he would like to join the Night Squad right now and help them kill monsters. The princess understood everything perfectly, but she promised the baby that next time they would definitely discuss it with Raven. They stopped for a moment near a river, from whose bank opened an incredible view of a fascinating flowering garden and a huge estate. The princess was truly amazed. The estate even had its own artificial lake, as expected of the Dior family. Estella was enjoying the magnificent view with Naru when she felt like someone was behind her and looking directly at her back. The lady wondered if she should turn around and greet the young master, but she couldn't help but think that Raven only wanted a contractual relationship, and not sincere feelings were being discussed. Therefore, she decided that in any case, she should maintain distance and moderation in communication with the young master. The bar was noisy as usual tonight, and Raven couldn't find a place or privacy among the knights today. He clearly had the feeling that he and the princess seemed to be drifting apart, and today she announced that from now on she would eat in her room. The young man tried to invite the girl for a walk together and contemplate the beautiful sunset, but the lady categorically refused any request from the knight. She avoided communicating with him in every possible way, rejecting pleasant offers, and without answering questions. Previously, she herself said that this does not bother her, but judging by the girl's behavior, she is clearly angry. The young man had been turning over in his thoughts for a long time, and he didn't hear at all the conversation that the knights behind him were directing at him. Theo complained about Daniel because he kept telling stories about his wife. And probably the leader also wants to hear why his wife suddenly became incredibly cold, and Daniel tried to warm her up with his hugs. The captain listened to Daniel's story and suggested that she might have cold sensitivity, and maybe his wife just has cold hands and feet, and this is just a normal body reaction. Raven tried to distract himself from his thoughts, but no matter where he was, he didn't leave the young princess out of his mind for a second, who, for unknown reasons, refused to spend time with them in every possible way. And an interesting idea occurred to him, thanks to which they could start communicating again. And she forgot her grievances. The young master understood that he needed to act decisively, but for some reason, standing near the princess's room door, he was pacing back and forth, and he could not take a decisive step in her direction. Suddenly, Estella heard strange footsteps outside the door, so she went out and asked what the young master was doing here. The young man admitted that he wanted to apologize properly for the matter with the baby, but the lady assured him that it really didn't bother her. In fact, the young man clearly felt that the princess was still very worried about something. He wanted to take her hand, but the girl instantly pulled away, and the young man got the feeling that he would never reach her again. He couldn't hold back and asked openly, since nothing had happened, because then the princess was still avoiding him, and openly did not want to contact him. She really cares. But in this case, it is better for them to sit down and talk together so that no one has misunderstandings. Estella felt they needed to talk to the young knight, so she silently accepted his terms, and a few minutes later, the two were sitting in the living room. The lady started first and admitted, as she had said before, that she was in no way avoiding communication with Raven. But it wasn't clear to him why the girl then decided to eat in her room. But it turned out that she thought if she kept her distance, then the young master would be much calmer. After all, he previously made it clear that they are not a real couple, but are only in an official marriage of convenience. The random words sent shivers down the young master's body, and at that moment, he realized what the real reason was. He admitted that he was the first one to push the princess away, and that he really has no right to say those words to her. But after saying they were strangers, the young man felt a little lonely. He really didn't understand anything until the princess told him how she felt when she was suddenly pushed. So if someone had offended the young princess, the young man wanted to apologize. And he also wanted the girl to live comfortably on this estate with baby Naru. Somehow, this man could not ignore all this pain, and those words with which he pushed the princess away were made solely for the good of the dear family. So she tried not to insist on this matter, but she could no longer ignore the pain she had been accumulating for so long, because everything was fine. But deep down Estella was very hurt and anxious. To the girl's great surprise, the young man said he did not consider her a stranger. And that day, he really had no right to say such a thing, but he also had no choice but to say other words. The princess replied, "The young master is truly a terrible person and hurt her a lot. And it was also incredibly cruel of him to say such a thing, because everything was fine for them." After these words from the girl, Raven suddenly carefully touched her face and held his breath for a moment. He admitted that the princess has an incredibly sweet smile, and when she smiles, it is magically charming. The young man abruptly withdrew his hand and did not understand what happened to him at that moment, and why he decided to give the girl an unexpected, sincere compliment. Estella admitted that she was still angry and felt an unpleasant feeling of sadness. And it was very painful for her to hear this directed at her, because the fragile girl also has a heart. She said that above all she was angry with herself, who unhesitatingly trusted the young master. And that was her big mistake. The lady knew very well how much the young master cared about all the members of the Yor family, and treated everyone with special attention and respect. But the young man, unintentionally as always, put a difficult moment on his shoulders. Without asking anyone for help, Estella carefully extended her hand to the young master and told him that she didn't like always being at odds with the person she lives with, and so this conversation should end, and each party expresses their opinion after listening to each other. Raven was very happy to hear the kind words and enthusiastically took her hand, without fully realizing that the lady was staring intently into his puppy eyes. She asked him to release her hand, and Raven apologized because it was difficult for him to control his fierce emotions. Now the princess has clearly seen that the young master also has feelings, and he is very worried about everything that happened and is behaving very strangely. With trembling hands, he pulled a blue box with a bow from his pocket and gave it to the girl. It was a warming ointment, and they say it is useful when your hands are very cold. He also heard that cold was bad for health, so he asked the princess to take care of her skin. But in fact, the young man, when all this time he refused to hold the girl's hands, saying that his hands were cold, he was simply looking for a reason to hide his wild embarrassment, and not to hold hands. The princess did not expect such a special gift from the young master at all, and the young man clearly wanted to take care of her. The lady smiled sweetly and thanked the young man for his attention and for such an unusual gift. Estella happily looked at the gifted cream and promised to use it carefully, remembering the young master's feelings every time. The next day, at breakfast time, the young man sat in splendid isolation. Although they hadn't had breakfast together in a long time, they made peace with the princess yesterday, but she didn't say she would come to breakfast, and she had been having breakfast in her room for a while now. Raven no longer expected the girl to visit him with her presence, but suddenly the lady opened the door and apologized for being late. She admitted that she wanted to take Nara with her, but she looked very sleepy, and the young man suggested ordering the servants to bring food to the baby's room. And when he woke up, he could have breakfast in peace. The young man began to talk about the engagement and suggested holding the event in about a month. And if the girl had no problems, an invitation could soon be sent to relatives and friends. If this happens, the young man should go to the imperial capital this week and do some shopping before leaving. So he decided that he should definitely invite the princess with him. Estella happily agreed, and the inspired young man said that tomorrow they would go to the best boutiques in the empire. Silence fell on the street, and moonlight crept silently through the translucent curtains of the room in a corner. Among the soft shadows sat a red-haired lady, and her hair, like tongues of fire, gleamed in the twilight. She sighed, feeling the weight of the night pressing on her shoulders, but there were times when it was in solitude that she found the long-awaited inspiration. The maid next to her suddenly flinched at the broken vase, hearing her mistress's cries that someone had abandoned her for this wicked woman. She held an engagement invitation in her hands, and it was from Charlene's family. But the lady was not going to give up the great prince. The girl perfectly understood that if she didn't do something urgently, her happiness might end up in the hands of the hated villain. It saddened her that the young master would abandon her to marry this wicked woman. But to her delight, the girl remembered that the princess would come to the imperial capital for the first time, and it was probably worth inviting her to a tea party to meet this scoundrel in person. The maids were sure that the princess would be delighted by their mistress's kindness. And this is indeed an excellent idea, so you definitely need to send an invitation right away. And the lady, who was brazenly deprived of the love of her life, intended to show the stranger to whom that young man truly belonged. The engagement invitation was sent in the name of the Duke of Gyre, and the whole city was filled with rumors about their upcoming wedding. The daughters of aristocrats, who dreamed of being in the same place, were deeply saddened that an enviable partner was taken right under their noses. The Duke's official engagement announcement left them desperate, while everything proceeded normally at the Gyre estate. The captain told the knights that upon arrival in the capital, they would be temporarily relieved of their nightly duties, and they could do whatever they wanted, and this meant that the knights were planning a short vacation, but they will go there as escorts for the young lady, so that she is completely safe. The young men were actually already happy, but they were sad that they would still have to work. But the captain argued that this was not so bad, and promised that as soon as they returned home, the knights would have a well-deserved rest, so now they have to try and give it their all. A few days later, the day of departure arrived, and the butler, bidding farewell to the young couple, he promised to follow them as soon as he had sorted out his affairs on the estate. The young man politely bid farewell to his old friend and extended his hand to the princess, offering her to embark on an exciting journey. But the most important thing is that they didn't want to be alone with her in the carriage, and little Naru embarked on a magical journey with them. The child eagerly awaited this journey and was incredibly inspired by the upcoming trip. The child was happy to be able to walk around the city with everyone and said he was the happiest person on earth thanks to the young master. And Estella, the young man, warned that on the way they should make a couple of stops in cities and that the baby would be happy to see all the sights. Hearing this, Naru's eyes widened even more, anticipating a magical journey. The carriage, along with the accompanying knights, left the estate, and this journey promised to be incredible and memorable. When it was time to leave, Naru ran out with shining eyes. The street flooded with sunlight, and he felt his heart fill with joy, and he looked at Estella, who was holding his hand with a gentle smile. Laughter. He imagined them exploring new streets, trying local delicacies, and making new friends. There were so many people around them, and each of them seemed to be part of an incredible story. The walk through the first city where they stopped came to an end, and that night the princess, from tiredness, did not notice how she fell asleep on the young master's shoulder. Baby Naru saw that Estella was tired and asked Raven to let her rest, and not to wake the young princess. That afternoon, they arrived at the imperial capital and the luxurious residence of the Duke of Gyre. It was a huge and incredibly rich mansion, which seemed to fit into a small town. Perhaps the Duke of Gyre was the only person in the empire who owned such a large plot of land in the capital itself. And due to Raven's carelessness, the princess sometimes forgot that he was the most influential person after all the members of the royal family. A topic immediately came up, and the young man apologized for the long wait and promised to give the girl a short tour tomorrow, but only after everyone had gone to their rooms and rested well. He introduced the girl to Nathan, who was escorting her, and this was Henry's son and manager of a huge estate. The father was very protective of his son and reported that he was very happy to meet the young lady. But to his surprise, next to the arriving guests, the young man saw a small boy who looked incredibly similar to the young master. Seeing the young man's stern look, little Naru got scared, and in fact, Nathan once served as a sailor. That's why he still has such a formidable face, but in reality, he is very kind, and the child has absolutely nothing to be afraid of. He led the girl and Nara to their new bedroom, and this room was specially prepared for Princess Estella. Nathan told the child that the young master's room was next door, and a little later he promised to definitely show him the entire estate. Suddenly, the princess saw an invitation on the table, and noticing it, she experienced a strange feeling. Nathan said that this was an invitation to a tea party, and that it was personally addressed to the young lady. The princess had just arrived in the imperial capital, and it was quite strange that she had already received an invitation from a stranger. The letter was marked. The message was from Lady Earl, but Estella could not determine who the sender was. The princess decided to take the opportunity, and the next day she went to a tea party hosted by a mysterious stranger. But for some reason, as soon as the princess appeared at the event, the girl mysteriously fell silent and lowered her head so as not to say anything unnecessary, given the young lady's irritable temper. The girl modestly tasted the tea and asked why the ladies were embarrassed in front of her, and they hadn't spoken a single word yet. But to make all the facts clear, it is worth going back a little, or to be more precise, 2 days earlier, when Estella had a conversation with the young knight. She wondered if she was really going to this tea party, as it was a completely useless event. The lady noticed Raven's strange reaction, but said she wanted to know what was going on in secular society. So she at least needed to show up there for the sake of decency. Estella was known as the cruelest girl, and obviously, Raven immediately began to worry that the lady might do something incredible there. She stated that this was her first public appearance and promised not to do anything that could tarnish the young master's reputation. The young man said that he was actually not worried about it, and he saw how the princess gradually began to get angry. It seemed to him that Estella simply didn't get along well with people, so he warned that if the girl didn't want anything to do with these gossips, she might as well not go anywhere. When Estella joined the tea party, the first thing she thought of were Rebaine's words, uttered by the young man before the event. The atmosphere at the tea party was truly unusual for the young lady, but she tried to show the knight that she really needed it. But after staying there for some time, to be honest, the princess still began to feel discomfort from the ladies surrounding her. And it was at that moment that one of the ladies present asked if everything was to the liking of the beautiful Princess Charlene. The redhead lady admitted that she had been looking forward to this day very much, and meeting the young mistress in person, she understood why Mr. Raven chose her. The ladies present looked at the lady with excitement, fearing that the conversation would take a completely unknown turn. The behavior of this girl, who personally invited the princess, was beyond the limits of decency. But maybe she just wants to show that, in her society, this is completely acceptable. A guest smiled and said she was amazed by the beauty of Mrs. Estella. Although she herself is a girl, and probably children choose her not only for her pretty appearance, Princess Charlene behaved quite confidently and was cautious about the statements of each of the Soviet ladies because anything could happen. One of the girls said that her friend recently received an official marriage proposal. She couldn't say that this lady had a calm character, but she had to consider that she had a truly dominant disposition, and perhaps the fiancé was simply under her control. The ladies continued to talk about the poor young man and proudly declared that they would like to stay away from this person. Because demons are often introduced into still waters, the ladies discussed that this couple was indeed going to get married, but that their union would definitely not last long. The girl asked what the princess thought about this, but Estella slowly replied that her love must undoubtedly be charming, but she is sure that she and this lady have a lot in common, knowing very well that. In reality, the insidious girls were only talking about her, without specifically mentioning any names. The girls didn't immediately understand what the guest meant and asked her what her words meant. Estella offered to laugh together, holding a fork in her hands because this young lady probably got into everyone's throat. She said that, to tell the truth, she perfectly understood those present and the ladies. And if one person dislikes another, one has a wild desire to trample them so that they can never look them in the eye again. The lady admitted that she would like to deprive that person of all dignity, and that's why she loves such conversations. Estella always found something to answer the aggressors, and this time she asked what the girls would like to do to this young lady, towards whom they feel great hostility. She offered to contribute a couple of ideas, because all the ladies know very well that she is called the cruelest woman in the entire empire, and the present ones should probably watch their words in the future, because they think they can easily fool everyone around them. The guests present began to behave a little more modestly, and the princess wanted to know from them why the girls started to be shy and completely silent. One of the ladies couldn't stand it, got up from the table, and stated that she felt unwell, deciding to urgently leave such pleasant company. The lady really fled the table, unable to withstand the pressure of the most powerful woman in the empire. The main character of this event stared intently at the stranger and realized that it was not worth dealing with this girl, since with just a few words she can make a person offended, cry, and leave. The tea party came to an end. The girls talked about the excellent event, and the main character of the tea party thanked the princess for taking the time to visit them with her presence. Suddenly, the lady was speechless, and this only meant one thing: the Duke of Deer himself appeared at the tea party, and the ladies saw the venerable gentleman up close for the first time. All eyes instantly fixed on him as he walked slowly and confidently towards the central table, where the finest porcelain cups and beautiful bouquets of flowers were already placed, and every step of the Duke was filled with grace, like that of a man accustomed to attention and admiration. Attention to detail was a characteristic of the Duke of Gyre, and his way of communicating left a lasting impression on everyone. He radiated confidence, making everyone feel like he was creating something special around him. The Duke bowed his head condescendingly, turned to the princess, and at that moment his voice sounded melodious and enveloping. She asked if the young man had really come to pick her up, and the Duke admitted that he was actually too worried. In front of all the girls, he suggested returning home as soon as possible, catching the admiring glances of the surrounding ladies. The young man asked the girls to apologize for such a sudden intrusion and took the hands of his young mistress. It was a wonderful spectacle for the girls because they really loved this couple, and they say that Mr. Dior truly adores the princess and feels something sincere for her. The redhead lady only saw the silhouette of the young Duke and his new companion moving away towards an unknown future. Raven looked at his future wife with admiration, not hiding his sincere emotions. The girl saw how happy the young man was with the villainess, but she was sure this would not happen. She decided to make the Duke her husband at all costs, and no one dares to stand in her way, much less deprive her of the right to happiness. That night, the princess was reading a romance novel in her bedroom when someone knocked softly on her door. It was the Duke of Gyre, and seeing him so late, the lady began to worry if something had happened. Raven really wanted to please the girl and offered to take a short walk, because he has a favorite spot that no one else knows. The offer seemed tempting to the young princess, because this was the place she liked to go to. To the young master, about whom she had never spoken to anyone before, Estella immediately accepted the proposal, feeling the trembling excitement of pleasant communication with Raven, who in such a short time had changed beyond recognition. Princess Charlene agreed, and upon stepping out into the sunlight, she felt joy filling her, anticipating how they would walk along the narrow paths, surrounded by blossoming trees and fragrant flowers, and Estella realized that this time they spent together was becoming magical for her. The sunlight gently touched their faces, and an atmosphere of romance reigned around. Deep down, she hoped that Duke Raven also felt the attraction as strongly as she did. Their gazes crossed again and again, and each time a warmth burned in their hearts, foretelling an incredible future together.